Tomato yield responded to nitrogen fertilization on this sandy soil. Yield with no nitrogen in the left column was less than half the yield when nitrogen was applied. Several controlled release fertilizer programs using two products, the three columns to the right, either 80% controlled release fertilizer and 20% soluble fertilizer, all at bedding, or 100% of the nitrogen from controlled release fertilizer, again all at bedding, resulted in yields similar to that with the recommended nitrogen fertigation program shown in the second column. With tomato, controlled release fertilizers with two products at a reduced rate of nitrogen, 170 pounds per acre compared with 200 pounds per acre, resulted in similar yields as the recommended fertigation program with 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre or a controlled release fertilization program with 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The reduced rate achievable with the controlled release fertilizer resulted in a savings of 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Our standard approach for placement of controlled release fertilizers was to incorporate it in the bed at the time the beds were formed and mulched. However, we found that placing the fertilizer on the level ground and simply bedding over the wide band of fertilizer resulted in equal tomato yields. Compare the result with bedding over the wide band on the left in the figure with rototilling on the right. This result needs farm confirmation, but it could save the farmer an extra machine to incorporate the fertilizer. Pepper yield responded to nitrogen fertilization on this sandy soil. Yield with no nitrogen in the left column was half the yield when nitrogen was applied, either with the fertigation treatment, the second column, or with the controlled release fertilizers, the last three columns. Several controlled release fertilizer programs, the three columns to the right, either 80% controlled release fertilizer with 20% soluble fertilizer, all at bedding, or the 100% controlled release fertilizer program, again all at bedding, resulted in yields similar to those yields with the recommended nitrogen fertigation program shown in the second column. With pepper, controlled release fertilization with two products at a reduced rate of nitrogen, 170 pounds of nitrogen per acre, resulted in similar yields as with the recommended fertigation program with 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre or a controlled release fertilization program with 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. While not as dramatic as with tomato, the reduced rate of nitrogen achievable with the controlled release fertilization of pepper might result in a savings of up to 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Like tomato, our results with pepper demonstrated a choice for placement of the controlled release fertilizer. Either placement in a wide band on the level soil with bedding over, the left column in the figure, or incorporation by rototilling, the right column in the figure. However, more on-farm demonstration work will be needed dealing with placement of the controlled release fertilizer before a firm recommendation can be made. Results with watermelon and controlled release fertilizers were similar to our results with tomato and pepper. The watermelon crop, again, responded to nitrogen fertilizer on these sandy soils. Controlled release fertilizer with a recommended rate of 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre, either supplied as 80% controlled release fertilizer and 20% soluble nitrogen incorporated in the bed, or 100% incorporated in the bed from controlled release fertilizers, resulted in similar yields as with the fertigation recommended program. Furthermore, nitrogen rate can be reduced from the recommended 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre to 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre with controlled release fertilizers. Overall, our research with several vegetables and controlled release fertilizers showed the following. Polymer-coated urea and polymer-coated NPK controlled release fertilizers were effective alternatives to fertigation for situations where a one-time application of fertilizer is desired. Secondly, controlled release fertilizers can provide for a savings of up to 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. This is an advantage because less nitrogen needed by the growers for their crops is a financial savings, and If we can use less nitrogen to grow crops, there would also be less nitrogen at risk to loss to leaching or runoff from the fields.